I don't have time for that, however. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video, we are going to be doing my April wrap-up. Alright, so before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what's the worst book that you read in April. Can you believe it's already May? I can't. It's insane. I mean, time. She's an elusive mistress. But I will say, looking back, I did seem to have a pretty good reading month in April. I had a lot of high ratings. I did have a few middling ones. I also crawled my way out of a reading slump and then had some craziness in my real life that did take away from some reading time. But let's go ahead and dive into my stats so I can show you quantitatively how good of a reading month it was. Because in April, I read 14 books, and across those, I read 3,655 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours to pages, but when it comes to audiobook hours, I listened to about 90 hours. Yeah, this is double what it's been the last few months. Remember, I was trying to focus more on reading with my eyes and not listening to audiobooks? April laughed at that. My average rating for the month, as I said, pretty high with a 4.11 stars. And thankfully, I didn't have any DNFs. Next up, looking at my genre breakdown, I did stay within a few of them specifically. I read 1 fantasy book, followed by 4 comic bind-ups / graphic novels. I had 1 horror and 1 nonfiction, then 2 romance, 4 sci-fi, and finally 1 thriller. So looking at this, you can see that I did read a nonfiction book for the month. Yay! I read a comic or a manga. I didn't read a book that was 500 pages or more, but it was more than 450 pages. So I'm gonna say I did read a big book. And then when it comes to my series stats, love this number across the board. I started into 2, but I read 2 continuations, and then I finished out 2 series. So this stat in particular this month makes me very happy. I read 4 books off of my own TBR, and then I unfortunately bought 3. I say unfortunately, 2 of those were very, very much serotonin purchases. And then the last one I did know I would end up buying in April, so I wasn't super surprised about it. Do have a fairly good stack to work through today, but with that being said, there's also a few books in here that were read for specific reading vlogs. As per usual, I'm not going to review those here. If you'd be interested in seeing reviews of the books I read for those vlogs, go check those out specifically. I just came out with my Revenge of the 5th Star Wars reading vlog, so I'll put a link to that in the cards. But I did also have a Allison Saft author taste test come out in April, so if you're intrigued for my thoughts on 2 books from that author, go check out that video. I think for today's wrap up, I'm going to go through these from the lowest rated to the highest rated. So starting at the top is actually volume 3 of Magnificent Miss Marvel. What was the subtitle? Outlawed by Saladin Ahmed. So I did actually attempt to do another comic book reading vlog this year to come out on Free Comic Book Day, but life got in the way of that, and unfortunately it got scrapped. So I did read some comic bind-ups this month, and one of those was the Magnificent Miss Marvel series. This is the final in this run where we're seeing how things are unfolding in Kamala's life after some really crazy changes in the last few volumes. I personally didn't really love how things rolled out in this one. There was something that I've been waiting for since this series started, and we finally got that in volume 2, but it gets erased so fast. It gets written off so quickly, meaning I didn't really have any time to actually enjoy it. Along with that, there were a few side characters in this one that didn't feel like the characterization of them in the story matched with what we've seen previously, and I didn't love that. I also felt like the story itself ended in a way where it didn't seem like it was actually finished, and I don't know if that's because the series itself got canceled and the author wasn't aware of that, or if the author just didn't really plot things out well. So this one ended up being a 3.5 star. It was fine. I am probably going to continue reading Miss Marvel's series overall. I think the next run is a different author, and so I'm intrigued to see if perhaps that author does better for me. I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes. Next up is my nonfiction book that I read for the month, and that was The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, Beauty Obsession and the Natural History Heist of the Century. I went into this book both excited because I've heard a lot of positive things, but nervous because I bought a copy of this for my grandma a few years ago, thinking she'd be interested in it, and she told me it was so boring. She actually ended up not finishing it. I was apprehensive. And when the book starts out, at the very beginning, you're getting a narrative around this man who ended up performing a heist in this museum where he stole a bunch of bird skins and feathers. So things started on a great foot. I was really hooked in. But then we backtrack and see how the author heard about the story in the first place and then began investigating it and how it kind of took over his life for a little bit. Then he dives into the history all around feathers, the trade of them, how they became popular in fashion, how the scientific community started collecting them, then how feathers started to be utilized by fly tyers, which the perpetrator of this crime was. And once I hit that point, I totally got why my grandma could not push through on this, because it's super dry. It's interesting. It's also very niche area of history I feel like some people can very much appreciate, but overall I felt like the book itself got really bogged down. So when we finally got back to this actual crime, I was dying for something exciting to happen. The pace doesn't really pick up too much. At the very least though, I was much more engaged with the story and seeing how the police started to investigate this crime, because they didn't even know this happened until like 30 days later. And then the case itself actually has some real interesting twists and turns that I personally wished the author would have dived into those elements a little bit more, cut down the amount of time he dedicated to the history around feathers and all that sort of stuff. And then how this book rounds out isn't super satisfying, but it's also not the fault of the author. It's kind of just the situation that happened here. It doesn't end in a satisfying way. I can understand the author probably had a really hard time wrapping things up in a nice, pretty bow. So this was an interesting read, but I think if there had been some editing work done, this probably could have been even better a reading experience for me. So in the end, this was about a 3.5 star. This is a nonfiction book I probably won't keep on my shelves because it was interesting, but I don't ever see myself rereading or like referencing this book. Like I said, it's a very niche topic, so if it sounds interesting to you, highly recommend. We already talked about volume 3, so I think I'm just gonna do volume 1 and 2 together of Magnificent Miss Marvel by Saladin Ahmed. Volume 1 is Destined and volume 2 is Storm Ranger. And this first one was really interesting because we dive into Kamala getting sucked into a very sci-fi fantasy plotline that I just did not expect. And I realized the irony of saying that when talking about comics, which are inherently fantastical. This like really pushed the envelope for what we've seen of Miss Marvel so far. I really liked the storytelling aspect in the first volume actually, because every issue has a different narrator. One of them is Kamala, another is a member of this alien race which sees Kamala as their savior, and then the last is Kamala's mother. And the similarities and shifts we see between each of these perspectives was very well utilized in the story that was unfolding here. I also liked the art in this one. It felt very consistent all the way through, and again the sci-fi aspect of it was unexpected, but I really liked what they did with it and the utilization of color in some of those panels in particular. It also kind of reminded me of certain events that take place in the Marvel's movie with Kamala's family, so I had a lot of fun with that. Overall, I had a really good time with this one. I thought it set up the start of the series very well. It was a lot of fun, but it was also very weird and very unexpected. This came out to 4 stars. Then with volume 2, Storm Ranger, this one kind of sees the consequences of some of the events that take place in the first volume, which I did really enjoy, but I liked even more with this one the fact that we get to see Kamala really struggling to find a balance in her life as, you know, just this normal teenage girl with a family and school issues, while also being a superhero who has these more serious responsibilities than your average 16-year-old. I thought that was very well done. It didn't feel like a rehash of other characters we've seen struggling with this in the past. There are elements you can draw parallels to, but overall it did feel more true to Kamala's character and also to her culture, which I really liked here as well. This one was also 4 stars. Next up is a 4 star that kind of feels like cheating, but as I said at the beginning of this video, I was struggling with a reading slump at the start of the month, and I really wasn't sure what I needed to do to get me out of it, and I decided, you know what, I am gonna reread a romance favorite, and then I'll utilize that for my romance book club that I do in person. And that was probably the best thing I could have done. So I ended up picking up Truth or Beard by Penny Reid, the first in the Winston Brothers series. And I actually read this physically so that I could go through and annotate it, and had a phenomenal time. So if you weren't here when I first fell in love with this series, we are following the Winston boys, and each book is one of their different romances. This one in particular is following Dwayne, who is the 5th youngest and a bit of a grump, but he has been head over heels for Jessica James since they were teenagers. Unfortunately, she has always had feelings for his much nicer twin brother, Beau. But at the start of the book, Jess has recently moved back to town. She has a plan. She's going to work. She is going to get down her debt. And once she is free of it, she's going to travel the world and finally give in to the wanderlust she's felt for years. But she was not counting on a love confession from Dwayne. And I liked this just as much the second time around. I just have such a good time with these characters. Penny Reid's comedy style works so well for me. I always end up laughing out loud when I read her stuff. Jess and Dwayne have such good chemistry in this one. I mean, even when they are bickering back and forth like children, there's such tension there. You can feel the chemistry working between them. I also love that both the characters feel very well established as individuals. You see a lot of their personality in both of their perspectives, and it's furthered by the dynamics they have with the characters around them, which is something I also love about this series, is how the characters build on each other and build out throughout the series. Penny Reid is so good about that. Also a little spicy. I love the family in this one across the board. They just bring me so much freaking joy. This one's not my favorite of the series. I do have a few issues with it, namely around how the book starts out, like how Dwayne initially showcases interest in Jessica. I don't think that element aged super well personally. I kept my rating for this one at 4 stars, but I had such a good time with it. So much fun, and honestly, yes, I have been itching to continue a reread of the series with the next book. I don't have time for that, however. Final comic book that I read last month was Doctor Strange and the Punisher: Magic Bullets by, where'd we go? John Barber and Jason Murr. I saw this at my library and saw it was the first in the series. Turns out it's actually the only one in this little series, and thought that is such an odd combo of characters. I must see how this works. So at the start of this one, the Punisher is doing what he usually does, going after some mafia guys. After taking care of them, come to find out that apparently these guys are actually messing around with some magical stuff and breaking through dimensions, which is a problem. So he enlists the help of the closest magical being he can, Doctor Strange. However, magic is kind of on the fritz right now and can only be utilized through artifacts. So Strange is having to get his hands a little bit dirtier than normal. This was a really fun ride. I think majority of my enjoyment for this really did come from the fact that these two are so different, and watching them work together was a time. They have such an interesting dynamic, and I did appreciate the fact that each issue alternates perspectives for them, so we can kind of see how their thoughts on the other person shifts and changes throughout this experience. The villains are definitely not anything special. The plot itself, pretty forgettable, but I had such a good time watching these two try to figure out how to work together and having some really ridiculous interactions that when I finished this, I just had such a good time. I gave it 4 stars. Looking at my highest rated books of the month, I feel like it's only fair to do the reread first. So Josh and I officially finished our read through of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, with the final one, Systems Collapse. So this was a reread for me, his first time. I just love this character. I love the little found family that has been established throughout this series. I really especially love Murderbot's interactions with Art, a fellow bot, and then also with Iris, a younger human. So much fun. This one in particular really sees Murderbot kind of dealing with some of the very traumatic things they have had to experience throughout the series, and finally starting to, process the toll all of these events have had on them. And given the fact that one of my favorite things about this series is Murderbot becoming slowly more and more human-ish, naturally, I had a phenomenal time rereading this. I once again had to give it 5 stars. I love this character. I love this found family. I have so much fun with these books overall. And then Josh and I are so excited for the TV show that after finishing this, we pretty immediately started a reread of the first book again. Final one that I wouldn't really say I'm surprised I gave this 5 stars. I didn't quite expect to love this nearly as much as I did when I went in, and that would be I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. So this was actually the April pick for the Geek Squad Book Club, which is hosted on my Patreon. So I have a full spoilery review of this available to my Geek tier. If you are interested, I will put a link to that in the description down below. So this is set in July 1989, La Mesa, Texas, this very small town in which we are following Tully Driver, this teenage kid who has recently lost his dad and is just trying to find his way along with his best friend Amber. But one night they go to a party, and the events of said party really do change their lives and the lives of a lot of people in this small town. I honestly don't really want to give too much more than that because the summary of this is pretty vague on purpose, and I think it makes your experience of figuring out where the story is actually going so much better. Like I said, I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I started this book, but once I finally started to put the pieces together, it clicked and I was so here for it. I saw somebody describe this as like a more unhinged version of Catcher in the Rye, and listen, I didn't like that book. I do think that's kind of a perfect description for this. Looking at this character study through this horrific lens and sort of analyzing the slasher genre with it was so much fun. I can't really think of another book that quite does what this novel did here. Tully's not like a favorite character of mine or anything, but he was likable enough. However, watching him experience everything in this book, you have such conflicting feelings. And again, the way it works within the story to like discuss things from slasher movies was so interesting. I loved the friendship between Tully and Amber. The way it was presented throughout this was just, oh, it was so good. And the way Jones would utilize it in certain moments throughout the book was so clever and really gave certain scenes a especially powerful punch, I'll put it that way. So well done, and it made perfect sense for the characters that had been established here. It was so good. It was so good. I'm very, very impressed with this. I'm not surprised this has very mixed reviews. I mean, it's Stephen Graham Jones's writing style. It's very stream of consciousness. Sometimes you really do just have to follow along with the character and wait for them to get to the point. But because of that, it also makes perfect sense for being in the mind of a teenage boy. And then the numerous references to horror movies and slashers that are out there. I love how the author always weaves those into his books. Have a great time with them. But also, he came out with this banger line in the acknowledgments about his wife that was so sweet and romantic and has me dying for him to write a horror romance book. I would pick that up so fast. Yeah, so this was 5 stars and it was my best book of the month. I thought I would enjoy this book when I started it. I did not think it was going to be my favorite book of the month. And so on that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for going to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me, let's go with a dinosaur emoji for my little dude Rowan down here. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!